Little Orchestra. What's the plan in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, the plan is to journey through Beethoven's life over 11 events. We start in a week or two with childhood, and then with each chapter we cover a different aspect of his life. And by the time we get to chapter 9, we've covered all the symphonies, some of the other important works, but more importantly, we've really covered the story of Beethoven's life and all that it entails.
I heard from the grapevine that the first event's slightly different musically in terms of...
Yes, the first event, so we are the Little Orchestra, but the first event, there is no orchestra. Precisely for the reason that in Beethoven's childhood, he didn't write any orchestral music that has survived. So we'll be looking at his very earliest compositions, and then equally importantly, what was influencing him, what was inspiring him, what was his most important music teacher sort of feeding into this budding genius. So we've got Bach, Mozart, so we'll look at that in the round and how his childhood really shaped his trajectory both as a musician, his philosophy and his outlook on life.
Amazing. And I hear this is the Little Orchestra's first trip south of the river. That is going to be a bit of a base this year for you, apparently. Are you looking forward to working in such a beautiful venue?
Yes, Battersea Arts Centre is extraordinarily beautiful. It's sort of, I've always felt that since the fire and since they renovated, that it really does have that sort of story-like atmosphere, which is so suited to what we do, because the story is as important as the music.
So we start at the beginning, when Beethoven was a small boy. He had a rather difficult upbringing, you'd say?
Yeah, in a number of ways. I think probably chiefly because of the family tendency to drink. Beethoven's grandmother actually ended up being sent away to a nunnery where she lived out the final 20 years of her life because she was a full-blown alcoholic. Beethoven's grandfather, who was also Ludwig van, was a heavy drinker, but a dignified, successful man, very talented musician. He was always responsible, and he was also a businessman as well. His son, so Beethoven's father, was a mediocre musician. He was co-opted into helping his father's wine business very early on, and it appears that he very quickly developed an appetite for wine, which really was his undoing. After Beethoven's mother died when he was 16, Beethoven's father, Johann, became a real full-blown drunk, sort of following in the family legacy. So that, and I'd say Beethoven's first teacher was his father, who was not talented, was a bit of a bully, and sometimes Beethoven was sort of woken up in the middle of the night, sort of forced to practice into the wee hours of the morning because either Beethoven's father or one of Beethoven's other early teachers came home drunk and thought, oh, let's wake little Ludwig up and get him to do some work. So I think those two things, I imagine, would have had a traumatic effect on his psyche, on his development.
And so we leave Bonn after Battersea. What music are you going to cover in these first two events?
So once we leave Bonn, which we do when Beethoven's just shy of 22 years old, our first main chapter are the early years, Beethoven's early years in the city of Vienna, which is the musical centre of Europe. Interestingly, Beethoven was, in a way, he was very spoiled by where he grew up because he was surrounded by very intelligent, articulate, well-educated, progressive-minded, was a real philosophical sort of movement in the air that swirled around Bonn during Beethoven's formative years. So when we get to Vienna, age 22, Beethoven's also armed with great letters of introduction from the aristocracy of Bonn, introducing him to some of the most influential, powerful, wealthy, aristocratic music lovers in Vienna. But I would say most interestingly, Beethoven came to absolutely hate the Viennese. He thought they were idle, they were shallow, they gossiped, all the worst, the worst stereotype of the aristocracy. And he railed against them for his whole life, but really for his career, Vienna was an extraordinary place to be.
And finally, to those strong-willed people doing dry January, are they catered for at these events?
Yes, I actually did the January a year ago, and one of my team, Nathan, is currently attempting dry January. We'll see whether he gets to the end or not. So yeah, and it was Nathan's idea as well, that given that it's January, everyone's feeling a little bit probably financially strapped for cash, hungover from Christmas, or they've had a lot to eat. We've very specifically in this event, all of our cocktails, which are always themed, and we always give them a nice little name that connects them with the story and the event. All of our cocktails are, what do you call them?
They're virgin.
Yeah, virgin cocktails or mocktails, and we've got some lovely vegan food. So for chapter 1, the food is very much inspired by Vienna. And for chapter 2, we're going to a little village outside Vienna called Heiligenstadt, so it'll be more rustic Austrian food. So there are 11 events over the year, and the first one is called Prologue, and it covers Beethoven's childhood. I'd say that's going to be a really interesting one, because the first 22 years of his life, I suspect generally people don't know a huge amount about in the way that they might know about other periods of his life which are really associated with some of his greatest music. So really the first 22 years, we're working with quite a small body of music that he wrote in his childhood, because really I think his main focus was on becoming a virtuoso pianist. So you've got some quite unusual music which, seeing what Beethoven cooked up at age 9 is kind of interesting, and then literally within a year or two seeing this extraordinary leap in ability and craft. So seeing this early journey through his early development, I personally find really interesting, but also really getting a sense of what were the forces that shaped the rest of this very complicated, very talented man's life. And I think if you get a sense of those, then a lot of the stories that emerged later to do with women, to do with how he made his way through the world as a freelance composer, to do with his relationship with patrons, philosophy, the strands are there all from the beginning. So I'd say that's a really good reason. If you're interested in coming to a number of events, getting the early flavours that are going to become part of the recipe of his life is probably a good thing too.